Hi everyone, today let's talk about Google earnings. Do me a quick favor and like and subscribe and watch the video till the end to help out the channel, and let's get started. So Google jumped 14%, massive jump for this company. They announced a $70 billion stock buyback, absolutely massive there as well. Revenues increased 15%, fastest rate of growth that we've seen from Google in a while, and you can see earnings per share beat, revenues beat, YouTube advertising beat by a lot, cloud revenue also beating, and then traffic acquisition costs also higher than the expectation. And then they mentioned a cash dividend of 20 cents per share to be paid on June 17th. So again, another indicator that the stock is going higher. People are getting into this company. It's also now appealing to the dividend investor. And this is coming on the back of Meta's announcement in February of a dividend. It's a little bit concerning that a company like this is doing a dividend just from the growth perspective. Usually when companies announce dividends, that means they're going to grow a little bit slower. But at the same time, we are seeing Google grow quite quickly. Like I said, this is the fastest quarter of growth for Google in a while. Moving over to the Fear and Greed Index, basically flat, nothing really changing here. We can see that breadth has been hovering a little bit. Maybe we'll take a look at the 2-year. And I also wanted to highlight volatility continues to pull back down to that SMA, hasn't touched it yet. And then safe haven demand still in extreme fear, and junk bond demand continuing to go lower on those yields, still hovering in extreme greed. Moving over to seasonality, it seems like we got this rally, seems like we got this mid dip. And now we're pushing into this second half of the month rally. We'll see how that plays out. If this was shifted over to the right here, like we saw, maybe this rally is going to continue into the May time period a little bit. May is typically a little bit bearish, especially during that first 2 weeks. But maybe we see a first week rally, then we see this kind of dip low in the second or third week of May. And then that last week or maybe first week of June is supposed to be relatively bullish. Moving over to Fed futures for a moment, I just wanted to highlight we are basically at 100% chance here of a pause in May. June, very close to 100%, sitting at 80. And then July, more likely than not that we're going to stay a pause. And then that first cut still priced in here for September, even with the GDP numbers that we saw here today, which were decent. Moving over to earnings, you can see Microsoft and Google doing well, Merck & Co. also beating. T-Mobile missed on the top, beat on the bottom line. Caterpillar, same thing. Comcast beating on both, doing quite well. Intel missed on revenues, beat on earnings. Gilead missed by a lot on earnings. You can see minus $3.34 versus $1.56 expected. And revenues actually beat, which is interesting. And then looking at tomorrow, you can see Exxon, Chevron, AbbVie expected to report in the morning. And then if you hold anything into the weekend, there's really nothing here on Monday. Welltower, fairly interesting. Domino's Pizza in the morning on Monday as well. So looking at the economic calendar, you can see those GDP numbers coming in at 1.6. Definitely not as bullish as you would have expected at 2.5, with expectations at 2.5. And that did send the Russell a little bit lower initially, but it really didn't move around the Fed futures like we saw. And then looking at Fed balance sheet, only sold off $4 billion this week. And then 7-year note auction all the way up to 4.7 versus the previous at 4.18. And then looking at tomorrow, we do have PCE pricing in the morning. Definitely going to be interesting. Core headline. Core expected to be 2.6, down from the 2.8 previous. And then we get some Michigan inflation data later in the day. Moving over to Max Pain, we got all the way up to 507. Max Pain at 504. We expected to get above that 500 level. 505 is a bit of a put and call wall. We'll see how that plays. But with the earnings that we saw today, could even push to that 510 level. Total options 1.47. Put call ratio quite high, still at 4.8. Moving over to the charts, starting off with the S&Ps, you can see we continued that dip low, made a lower low. But on the longer time frames, we expected a higher low, and that is what we got. We rallied into the mid-session and then into the earnings, and you can see that earnings candle up about 1%. Massive move there. Got above all the EMAs and SMAs on the hourly chart. Next resistance would be 509.77, which fits with that max pain of 510. See how that plays for tomorrow. But this looks bullish here now, so we have a dip low, higher low setup, looking to see where this plays. And then on the medium term, you now have a high with a low, waiting to see if we get either a double top, lower high, or if this breaks that previous level, waiting to see where it goes to a potentially higher high. So right now, short-term bullish, waiting to see what happens on that medium time frame. Moving over to the tasty charts here on the 4-hour, you can see we tested that ATR stop. We did not close below it, so we held that level as support. Ended up rallying after hours on earnings. Now you have that upper ATR band at 510.63. That's going to be where you're going to find resistance, in my opinion. You can also see these ATRs are starting to bend more to the upside. We got this downswing, finding support. Looks like more of an upswing now. Looking for a retest of these previous highs back here from the end of March. Moving over to the NASDAQ, you can see that same move, rally up, dip down, rally up here again today. Looks very strong. It was actually down pretty substantially on the day, 0.48 going into that earnings, and then we went about 1% higher. We are testing that 200 SMA here on the hourly chart. We'll see if that comes in as resistance, but right now it looks very good. Took out this 424.75 level and then pushed to that 428.53 level. That's your current support. Still want to see it get above the 200, and I do think that it will. Still looking at that 21 EMA at 434 as a potential zone of resistance. Momentum looks very strong, volume rallying on this move, and everything still looks bullish, like I said. Moving over to the tasty charts, very similar thesis to the SPY. Rallied up, tested the ATRs, held that level, rallied up here mid-session, and then even more after hours. You can see we're up around that 429 area. You can see that 55 EMA, and you can also see that 89 EMA there at 430.73. I still think this is going to push to that upper ATR band. That's at 431.69, and that's going to move higher as these candles roll along. But you can see ATR bands bending to the upside, still a little bit of overhead resistance, but so far this looks good. Initial test, hold the 21, rallied up, everything looks good so far. Moving over to the Russell and the Dow, you can see the Russell was down quite a bit, similarly with the Dow. We talked about the pullback yesterday. We thought that was going to continue, looked for the lower high, and it seems to be hanging in there right now. Support 195.15, tested that level, seemed to be holding. Momentum faded a little bit. That's a little bit concerning. Want to see this regain momentum to the upside. We'll see how it plays tomorrow. Right now it's hanging in there after hours, so not bad. And then Dow up after hours, 381.37, pushing back to that 382.20 level. Momentum, again, basically flat from yesterday, which is a little bit concerning. Want to see this step back towards bullish, and that should confirm the rally a little bit more going into tomorrow's session. Moving over to AMD and Chipotle. AMD was up 1.33%, so AMD doing pretty well coming off of that 144 EMA. Similar thesis, rally up, dip low, higher low setup. It looks like it's going to go higher. It's up after hours. Want to see this push that 21 EMA up around 165. I do think it will get there. Seems like we have a consolidated base. Momentum's rolling to bullish. It still looks good here. And then we got Chipotle earnings, massive breakout, 6.33%, absolutely colossal. Getting back above this trend line. This is a very expensive stock at $3,100. I think they announced a stock split, but you can see this has been a runner. It's gone from around $1,700 up to $3,000, and it is now breaking out again here to all-time highs. No overhead resistance, price discovery. You could argue maybe a trend line resistance up around 4,100, but that would be a massive move. So Chipotle Mexican Grill on the move after a very strong earnings. Moving over to Apple and Tesla, you can see Apple turning about 0.5% higher here today. Still at that 21, still at VWAP, still overall a downtrend. But if it can get above 170.90, then we should push to the 55 EMA at 174.87. Let's zoom out here a little bit. You can see it's been pretty choppy, sideways price action. Critical zone here, overthrew it a little bit. It's right at the 21, right at VWAP. Looks like it's pushing to that 55. And then that level, 176.15, right behind that 55 EMA. Momentum and RSI look good, and it looked decent on the day. And then moving over here to Tesla, actually looks very similar in terms of price action. Critical level here, dipped below that level, rallied back up. It's right at the trend line, breaking that. 55 EMA at 177, right at resistance, 177.70, and then you have a trend line behind it at 180.62. So very similar setups here on Apple and Tesla, and both of them seem to be going higher, at least in the short term. Moving over to Microsoft and Alphabet, both of these companies had earnings here today, and they are up massive. You can see Microsoft dipped a new low here today relative to this most recent low. Tested the level, 194, got all the way down to 394, got all the way down to that 388 area, rallied up, looked strong into the end of the session, and then we rallied right back to that 55 VWAP and 21. We'll see how that plays. You can see that after hours move. It's pulling back a little bit, but not much. You would expect this to go higher. It's a good earnings. I'm going to do a longer video on both of these, so we'll keep it short here. And looking at Google, absolutely massive, more than $20 on that move. Again, going to the 12-hour, you can see massive candle. It's pulling back a little bit again, but not a lot. Still looks very, very strong here on the 12-hour. This is all-time highs here for Google, so massive breakout, and you would expect it to go higher. Moving over to Meta and Netflix. Meta had a big move down yesterday on earnings. Did a couple of videos on that, and you can see the gap down and fall here. Got as low as 415, didn't quite fill the gap, rallied back to 444. Definitely seemed like a little bit of an overreaction there on Meta, and Netflix rallying here today 1.74. Seems like this 551.17 level is a pretty solid support currently, looking for at least a short-term move higher to that 21 EMA. Around 605. Moving over to staples and discretionaries, we got staples falling 0.24. You can see we came down to the level, almost touched it, 75.40. That's a critical zone. Need that zone to hold. Got above it yesterday, overthrew it to these previous highs, found some rejection. To me, this looks like an initial test, and then we're pulling back to support. Need that zone to hold. Otherwise, if this double tops, this could be a disaster here. And then looking at discretionaries, you can see we are testing that same zone. We've touched it a couple times. We almost touched the level again here today, holding that 200, and then bounced, ended up positive on the day, 0.08. Everything looks pretty good here, and you can see after hours we got up to 175.41, which is above that 76 level, and if that breaks and holds tomorrow, then you're looking at 180.10 as your next level of resistance. Maybe some resistance in here around 177, but we'll see how that plays. Momentum rolling to bullish, and it does look good. Moving over to transports and utilities here. Utilities having a massive run over the last couple of days. Transports up 1.29, tested that same low, rallied up, momentum still strong, volume ramping on this move, so it does seem like we're going to get a bit of a swing high, maybe we get into that 70.3 area. And then looking at utilities, 7 days in a row of bullishness, getting above 66.81. Next level of resistance is up at 68.36. This looks clean, higher high, momentum bullish, RSI not overbought yet, so we had a pretty aggressive move, touched the 200, rallying up, and I think this might be what I'm looking for. On several of these charts, you can see rally high, dip low, higher low setup, rally up, and it does look good. Moving over to breadth, you can see continued to go a little bit higher here on the 20-day breadth, but not a lot. So it seems like resistance is still holding here around that 38 level. And then looking at 50-day, actually pulled back, tested support and held. Again, you want to see this continue higher. Seems like breadth on this short-term rally might be fading a little bit, but mega cap tech is keeping markets higher, at least in the short term, and this could just be a little bit of a pullback in time and a push higher still. Just being patient, waiting for some clear direction. Moving over to the 200-day breadth, you can see a big wick low, tested that 69.38 area, still holding at that 9 EMA, momentum bullish. RSI still looks okay, so nothing super clear here either. Right now, dip low, pullback, higher low setup, need it to push back above that 76 level, and it does seem like it can do it still. Moving over to yields, 2 years still hovering in the same zone, but right at the highs this time. Pretty decent push higher on that GDP number. And then similarly here, 10-year breaking out, closing at a new relative high, pushing towards that 5 level. Again, it seems like we're headed towards normalized conditions right now, with the 2-year hovering and the 10-year going higher. And if we do get into normalized conditions, that should be a big red flag for you as a trader. We don't typically see recessions while we're inverted, and this is the longest inversion in history, but once we get into normalized conditions, that is definitely the concern in my opinion. Moving over to the dollar, you can see a wick high and a wick low, just a little bit lower than yesterday's low. RSI a little bit higher. You would expect this to push to the upper side of the range. Still looking at this as a rally, bull flag rally, and if that happens, that's going to be quite bearish for equities. You can see bearish momentum here, RSI a little bit bearish, which is a little bit concerning. We've seen it before. You can see it here, pull back below the SMA, broke back above, made a much higher high. So doesn't mean anything quite yet, and I still think this is a bullish setup. Moving over to bonds, you can see J&K gap down, hit the level and rallied, 93 holding as support. J&K pretty much moving in lockstep with markets right now, not giving us any clear direction outside of what the market's already giving us, but it does look like a low, higher low setup, bounce off that move. Want to see it get back above 93.60 or so. And then looking at TLT moving lower as yields go higher. At this point, it looks like it's going to break the trend and push down to that 85.90 area. Moving over to volatility. Volatility continues to dip lower. Did throw a wick to that 9 EMA, sold off. Still looking at support down around 1470. Haven't tested that zone yet. Momentum RSI look bearish. If this zone breaks, then we're probably headed back to that 1275 area. Then we'll see what happens. In a bit of a no man's land and still looks bearish. So That means equities should be headed higher tomorrow. Moving over to my accounts, you can see the account value did normalize back to above 130,000, and it says I only made $200 today. I'm not sure exactly how they do this math, but I figured it was going to normalize, and I don't know how much of the after hours pricing this is factoring in. You can see we finished at 424, we're up at 429 already. But in terms of positions, still continuing to sell covered calls here. It was down 149, less than that, continuing to bring that in, $1.24. You can see that's up a little bit after hours, so that's good. And then looking at the Qs, still have my covered calls, rolled those out to 5 days from now up to 423 for $7 credit. So my max profit there is actually up at 430 for Tuesday of next week. And then I have some puts for tomorrow and some puts for Monday. So trying to collect some credit on that, about $150 for tomorrow and then $200 for Monday. Might maybe put on a second set of covered calls if it looks super bullish. But right now I'm not all the way there, pretty moderately bullish going into tomorrow's session. Let me know down in the comments section what you think of Google. Are they going to continue to rocket higher tomorrow? Is the dividend worth investing for? And what do you think of that stock buyback? Definitely like and subscribe if you got any value out of this video, and make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Of course, none of this is financial advice. This is all for entertainment purposes. Good luck in your trading and have a great day.